Number two, they got rid of their investigative reporters. The people who could connect the dots between the money that was given to the administration by the polluters and the kid with asthma. The fact that you can't fish in almost safely in almost any freshwater body in California because of policies that are directly related to money that was given to the White House. Americans don't understand those connections, and I'll explain that in a second. And because they don't have an obligation to serve the public interest, and their only obligation to their shareholders, they're no longer informing us of the difficult issues that we need to understand to make rational decisions in a democracy, issues like global warming and like toxics in our food and et cetera. Rather, they're entertaining us. They're appealing to the lowest common denominator, the prurient interest that all of us have in the reptilian core of our brain for sex and celebrity gossip. So they give us Lacey Peterson and Anna Nicole Smith and Kobe Bryant and Michael Jackson and, you know, Brad and Jen and Brad and, you know, whoever, J-Lo or whatever. And we know more about Tom Cruise and Kate than we do about global warming. And Americans today are the best entertained and the least informed people probably on the face of the earth. And that's a real problem for American democracy. Because you can't have a democracy long if you don't have an informed public. And even Thomas Jefferson said, an uninformed public will trade 100 years of hard-fought civil rights for a half an hour of welfare. You know, to the first demagogue or religious fanatic or tyrant who comes along and offers them a $300 tax break. He didn't say that second part, but that's what he was talking about. But and you know, there was a battle at the beginning of our country between Jefferson on the one hand and Hamilton Adams and Madison on the other, because Jefferson wanted a universal franchise. He wanted everybody to have the vote. But the others said, no, only the landed gentry should have the vote. And it wasn't because they were snobs or less democratic. It was because they believed that only the educated class would have the fortitude to strongly fight for our civil rights, that other people would be easily persuaded and misled by demagogues. And Jefferson agreed with them. He said, yes, of course that's going to happen, but the remedy for that is not to deprive the public of their right, but to forcibly inform them, whether they want to be informed or not. And that's why at the beginning of our country, we did something that no country on the face of the earth had ever done, which was we had mandatory public education in the 13 colonies. If you weren't educated, you could go to jail. If you didn't educate your children, public education, you would go to jail. And that's why Jefferson, you know, started all these educational institutes in every town and village, the University of Virginia, and all over Virginia, and all of Massachusetts did the same thing, and all the other colonies, because they said, you can't, that democracy simply is not sustainable if you don't have an informed public. Then in 1928, when, you know, when the electronic media was invented, when they discovered broadcast, you know, media and radio become widespread, Congress recognized this was going to be the medium by which to educate the public, and we could not afford to let it fall into the hands of profit-making corporations who would use it, who would make, you know, alliances with government and use it for their own purposes to make money and exploit the American people. But unfortunately, over the past few years, those laws have become eroded, and people no longer understand. And you know, I make 40 speeches a year in red states to Republican audiences, and I get the same reaction from Republican audiences when I tell them what's going on in Washington that I do from liberal college kids. The only difference is the Republicans come up to me afterwards and say, how come I never heard this before? And I'm like, it's because you're getting your news from, you know, Rush and from Fox. And many years ago, I came to the conclusion, you know, very kind of privately, that 80% of Republicans were just Democrats who didn't know what's going on. And then, this poll, I should change subjects because I'm really getting off track here. But anyway, there was a poll called the Pippa Report that came out in 2004 that basically supported my own anecdotal observations that did, you know, they did, what they found was that there was a survey of Americans, a widespread survey based upon their party affiliation and their knowledge of current events. And what they found was that the people who said that they were going to vote for President Bush had giant misapprehensions about major issues, current events. 70% of them said that they believed that Saddam Hussein had bombed the World Trade Center. 70% said that they believed that weapons of mass destruction had been found in Iraq. 64% said that they believed that President Bush strongly supported the Kyoto Protocol and strong labor and environmental standards in our international treaties. 70% said that they believed that the American invasion of Iraq had strong support on the Muslim street among Iraq's Muslim neighbors and among our traditional allies in Europe, which was not true. People went back twice to the same people. The second time to find out what the source of the misinformation was, and invariably the people who were under these misapprehensions said that their primary news source was Fox News or talk radio. They went back a third time to find out what people's basic values were. And they did that by posing a series of hypotheticals. They asked, for example, what if there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? What if Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with bombing the World Trade Center? What if the invasion of Iraq was mainly opposed on the Muslim street among our traditional allies? Should we have still gone in? 84% of Democrats and 84% of Republicans said the same thing. We should not. So there was no difference in the values. The only difference was the information. And that's why it's so important to have a functioning press in our country, because we will make rational decisions, but we need to be informed. And without that, we won't be.